So, welcome to the show today, everyone. I'm really excited. I want to introduce you to my friend Esther Deutsch. Esther, why don't you just share a little bit with my audience about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Jeff. It's an honor and pleasure to be here in your presence, but also on this show. So, as Jeff mentioned, my name is Esther. I am a social worker by education, but I work very corporate right now for a technology and cybersecurity company, um, dealing with some sales, some marketing, some community building, both internally and with our partners externally. I also do a lot of public speaking. I do a lot of coaching, some consulting, and I also primarily consult market for a company called MarketIntent.ai, which is a data and technology marketing startup.
Love it. And by the way, for my listeners, you will find this fascinating. I was not surprised to learn that Esther has a background in social work. She brings that caring, nurturing self to her networking. So this today is going to be a very different episode, and just to warn you, it's going to be a double episode. So first of all, I want to thank Esther for agreeing to this. It's not a small thing to say, sure, Jeff, I'll give you an hour of my life. But the reason Esther is here today, not to talk about technology, Esther is one of the most amazing connectors and networkers that I've met. Literally, for those of you who know me well, when I say that there's one person who's overwhelmed every system I've created, Esther is that one person. So, Esther, I'm going to get you to share a little bit about why you believe in networking so much, and then we're going to start to unpack some of the unique skills that you possess. And for a lot of people, they're looking at it trying to think about how do they do it, whereas to you, it's probably as natural as breathing.
I really appreciate that. It's a huge compliment coming from you, Jeff, because I feel the same. So
Well,
it's good
thank
to
you.
meet like-minded people, and that's what it's about, right? It's about finding those people that you connect with and going further together. So that's really my why. That's really it.
I love it. And I think the key phrase I've heard over and over from you, and this is where I realize that there's another level to networking. I just want to define, what does networking mean to you versus community building? Because I think that's a really big distinction that I'm working on myself.
Well, I probably have room to do them, but to learn from you, because I do see them as being somewhat overlap, because by networking, you're building relationships, and that's a big part of building community as well, and making people know that they matter and figuring out why and what you can give to them and what they offer and have to offer others and their strengths. So it's definitely, I think it's similar skills maybe that they both use. But I think networking is really, it's over, I don't know what the word is, but I think that people maybe get worried or nervous when they think of networking. And I think that it's really, in essence, really simple. It's about meeting other people and finding connection. Like, it's really connection. And so is community. So I think they're sort of synergistic and maybe work together, but a little bit different in application.
And I think that's a really good distinction. They're distinct in that they aren't, but they are. The way I see it is, a lot of networking is one to one, and most mentors on the planet, that's what they teach, is how to be one-on-one networking, which, as you said, is relationship building. What I think with community building, we're removing the self from it, and it's many to many. And
That's a really, yeah.
I think that's where the it starts to become a three-dimensional living, breathing organism rather than a whole bunch of people in a database.
Well, I guess also it's a really interesting perspective. The way that it's worked for me is that through networking, if you network enough and consistently, you actually build a community of people who may not know each other, but who and they're a community through you. It's kind of a weird thing, and you're making me realize it as you're speaking. But that's part of the power of the one-to-one and building that sort of relationship that it grows on its own and takes on a life of its own, which is similar to community building. I've done a lot of community building in my past life, and I actually take an approach to making it individual, and a community is really made up of individual people, just like a business. You're not selling to a business, you're selling to the people in the organization. So it's really, they're both sort of interchangeable, but different. So it's interesting.
And full disclosure, whether Esther knows it or not, community building is far more advanced than networking, and she's inspired me to really examine how I show up and how I play. And for those of you who know me well, I've had to create some new and improved systems. So Esther is the inspiration for that. So I wanted to get her here to share some of her ideas. So the key phrase that I think you probably do naturally that others have to do analytically is about building relationships. So I want to pick that up and carry that conversation a little bit. We'll talk about relationship building, and then we'll sort of talk about how that applies in other areas. What does relationship building mean to you? I don't need a textbook definition, but what does it mean to you? And then we'll talk about how you do it.
Sure. It's a hard question to answer for me, but I would say that it really means understanding and being curious and learning other people and what drives them. So what drives them to me is a little bit about what's their past and where are they going, what's important to them, what drives them, what are they looking to accomplish, whether it's through your conversation, in life, in business, or both, or all. And then figuring out a way that I can use myself to help further their agenda and get them where they want to go, and how the intersection of that for me and what it is for them. So it's a high level of self-awareness, as well as being curious and open, and being able to be receptive to the person you're engaging with, where they want to go, and starting there before starting, with yourself.
And I think that's kind of one of the things I get the most blank looks from people. When you put other people ahead of you, a lot of people look at it and say, well, what's in it for you? I'm going to guess that that's not a question that resonates with you as one you'd be asking. Is that fair?
Absolutely fair. I think that that's a big challenge that many have to overcome with networking. And sometimes I find myself, getting stuck in that trap, what I call, of what's in it for me. It also has to do with recognizing that networking is not a short game, it's a long game, and it's not transactional if you want to do it right. In my book, it's not transactional. It can be transactional, but that's not what I call networking. That's what I call having a transaction between two people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, think of it like a friendship, right? You're not going to go to somebody you just met and say, hey, can you buy from me? Or can you give me
I need
money?
help moving.
What was that?
I need help moving. Can you come move a couch for me?
Exactly, because chances are you're not going to be friends much longer if you ever were.
Yeah.
You do this on long term and building that foundation.
Oh, we just lost your audio, Esther. Oh,
Sorry.
there we go. Perfect.
Yeah, I was going to say you want to focus on building that relationship, and then the rest will come.
And I think that's exactly right. A lot of people want transactions, but the problem is you get a transaction from a person, then you got to run around and find the next person for the next transaction. Whereas if you build a relationship, the next transaction just naturally appears because you've got that connection. And I'm going to use an example where Esther has a friend who's working on a project and nothing in it for Esther, but she sent it out to her network and said, hey, everybody, I have a friend working on this project. Who knows somebody that can help? I think that's I'm going to use the word mature, which sounds judgy for those who don't do it. But I think that's the secret to networking. It's not like, there's a scarcity mindset of, here's a transaction, give me one back. It's more, how do we serve one another and we're all better for it?
I love that. And if it's something that it plays into, your networking skills are useful for life too. It carries over. And if you're somebody who sees the world in that way, then it's going to translate to your networking. So if it's something you're working on, I would say start in your personal life and find a way to be more giving, more generous, and think the people just around you, spouses, kids, whatever, of how you can give and think about them before yourself, and it'll translate into your networking and vice versa.
Yeah.
But I think that's also a lot, I don't want to say a mistake, but something that people don't realize, that the best way to be a great networker, half the, 50% of your time might not be looking for opportunities for you or someone else. It's actually finding people who are good people and who have value to offer, and resources that you can share with your network. So it's not direct business for yourself. It's a really powerful tool that people forget. Look for people who could help people in your network, not just directly refer you business.
And I think that's something I see in the more evolved networking communities is, as a collective, we all know a lot of people. So it's not uncommon for me, I'll reach out and say, hey, I need somebody in Florida who happens to know how to prune a specific type of tree. And somebody will reach out and say, hey, you need to talk to this person. And a lot of times people say, well, what's in it for you? Well, I made someone else's day better. Tomorrow they're going to remember me, and they're going to find a way to make my day better. And by the way, it doesn't have to be that direct. It just might be, like the Godfather. Someday I'm going to ask a favor, and you're going to have to respond in kind. But it is about that relationship, not about that transaction.
It's my belief too, and maybe this is in my personal life, so talking about it translating, but I believe that if you have a desire to help somebody, even if it doesn't seem on paper that there's a way for you to do that directly, there will be an opportunity either now or down the road to do so in some way, shape, or form. So we'll just put that out there.
Now, this baffles me. So I'm going to ask you probably what I think is a very hard question. People ask me all the time, how do you build relationships? And I have a hard time quantifying it because it's just happens, and I think you're probably similar, but what are some of the things you do consciously to, and I'm going to use the word add value, but I know you when you're networking. And by the way, for anybody listening, anybody who I know who has been introduced to me through Esther, she brings enormous value because they all really truly appreciate her. How do you build relationships that matter?
So I think about this a lot because I want to be able to kind of share the secret. So I want everybody listening and everyone out there to be able to network like you and I. And there's no exclusivity on networking. And I say a lot of the things that I do, and still many people don't do it. So don't be one of those people. Like, take notes and implement it, and you'll see the changes. And I want other people to be successful. So just gonna start with that. But and now I forgot the question because I got so excited about saying that.
Love it. The question is, how do you actively build relationship? We'll start with building relationships, then we'll get into the networking.
So the first thing you have to do is care. So if you don't care about others, this is going to be a challenge for you. And it sounds silly, but it's nuanced. And when you're speaking to somebody who doesn't, you will feel it and you will know. So you have to care. If you have 30 minutes and the person goes to 31, and that's going to be a problem for you, that could be challenging in building relationships, because when you're the person engaging in this connection, you don't want to be feeling that sort of energy. So you need to care. I would also say that you need to be curious. You need to be curious. Every single person has something that you could learn from them. And whether it's even if it's what not to do, that's still a value, right? And that's still something that we could learn from. So I think mindset is extremely important. And one of the things that I like to do is every time I walk into a space, and that could be a virtual Zoom because that's a space too, I try to think about what could I contribute to this meeting that if I wasn't there, it wouldn't be there. And that's one little thing that I think if everybody did before they entered into a networking event or any kind of event around relationship building, if they thought about what makes me unique, and again, it's back to self-awareness, which I hate to bring it back there, but it's so correlated. What do I have to offer that? And it could just be a smile. It could be you pick one person to do something kind for, to reach out to after. That counts. Like, that matters, because for that person, if you weren't there, they might not have had that connection.
So I think that's those little things are what makes the difference between someone who's successful and someone who's not, I would say. And they also make a difference in the world. So that's a nice side benefit. But that's where I would start. So
And I love this is a very, very important point. So I'm going to bring it out. The best networkers I know are very self-aware. They know what they're looking for. They know what their triggers are. They know what annoys them. They know what interests them. And I think curiosity is the word I love to pull out of that, because that was the one I missed. I'm a naturally curious person. So when I was teaching others how to network, it never occurred to me that I needed to teach others how to be curious. But that's the thing. There's a lesson in every person I've ever met. And sometimes, as you said, the lesson is what not to do. Sometimes the lesson is what to do. So I think, now I'm going to ask you this. This is a sort of a tangent, but your level of self-awareness, do you think that's something that people can cultivate, or is that something that you're either born with or you're not?
100% something that people can cultivate. I personally am far from where I hope to be in my own self-awareness down the road. So it's something that I'm actively working on, and even just being aware of it is helpful. I guess that's back to self-awareness, but I'm trying to, there's always room to grow, right? In every area for everybody, of course, myself included. And you can absolutely cultivate it. There's amazing books, there's more workshops. I do a lot of like assessments regularly on myself. And every day I'm learning about others, and be curious about yourself. It's like
Yeah.
love. You can't give it to others until you have it, in your own. Sometimes I'll be like, I didn't know I liked that food, and maybe I didn't back in the day. Like I literally have self surprises all the time because I think I know myself and then I really don't. But just recognizing, being aware, I hate to use that word, but knowing when they occur and crop up, and finding different resources to work on yourself can totally help you get better in your self-awareness. And even having a mentor, talking to somebody else who sees your blind spots, is really powerful, even if they're not, even if you see them as an equal, not necessarily, a TED Talk speaker or somebody, because you might not have access to somebody like that. Doesn't matter. It's somebody who is more objective than you are, because you're looking at yourself, and it's very hard to be objective. And I actually heard something really powerful that stuck with me. I forgot from who, which I feel bad about, but it was some author or book where they said that they asked a friend, if you weren't afraid of me, getting upset and there was no emotion involved, what would you tell me about myself? And they wrote, I think it was a book, they wrote that what they told them, they started to feel really bad about and attack. And then after, I had a moment of like self-reflection. I was like, changed it and
Yeah.
went to the moon, and was like so grateful that this person had told them that. And I was thinking, and like, who do I have in my life that I can ask, what do I need to work on? Because I care. I want to be a better person. I want to be a better servant to others. And if somebody, if you're asking the right person and you really care about being better, then it shouldn't be offensive. It's something that you can work on. So it's something I'm working on. And, it's something that I recommend to your question, to improve your self-awareness. 100%, I think, a learned behavior. So
Love it. And I think honestly, as you're saying this, I'm feeling that we need to talk a little bit about the self-awareness to recognize that feedback can either be something I'm going to be offended by, or it can be a really, like, if you recognize it as the precious gift. I mean, somebody is risking their status with you in a relationship to say, here's what I would improve about you. In my world, the only acceptable answer to that is thank you. Sometimes people give it to you as a gift. Sometimes they punch you in the face with it. But either way, is there a lesson in that feedback, and how can we be better? So I think self-awareness, it starts with a seed and it's got to grow. It's not going to happen overnight, right?
Jeff, if I could contradict my own self for a second, because I want to put out there a little caveat. There are times where people will give you advice or tell you things about yourself that aren't coming from a place of strength and may not be true for your situation. So I think there's a counterbalance. I think there's knowing, only you know yourself and your I've been guilty of this. That's why I've learned my lesson. So only you're the only one who's in your exact circumstances and know exactly what you need to do. And I also believe that we all have the answers inside if we get the right advice and direction and then reapply it, and we know what we need to do. So there's a checks and balances. And I say this because, you know, I don't know if you know, but I had founded some not-for-profits back in the day. And if I had listened to some of the advice that I had gotten of people telling me I was crazy or don't do it, it would never have happened. And many, many hundreds of lives were impacted as a result. So I think, and at that time, I did have doubts, but I did it anyway. And I look back and I shouldn't have had certain doubts. I should have done it because I knew in my heart what I needed to do and what was right. And sometimes I think that's why it's important to get it. When I said before, get it from the right people. So anyone who's looking to lift you up and elevate you and help you become a better person are the people that you want to ask for said advice. And even then, sometimes don't tell them this, but sometimes you take the advice and then you decide this isn't right for me now for whatever reason, and that's fine. And I'll never go back to them and say that. I'll actually say thank you so much for the advice. But the idea is to get the advice and to reflect on it and to see, does it apply? And maybe you'll say it's not good, and then you'll feel like it's a mistake and you can go back, but at least doing the work to consider it is important, and then try to have some kind of checks and balances, you know. And sometimes they will give you advice that you are like, you know, they were really right. So it's also about being honest with yourself and knowing when to accept it and when not to. Yeah.
Well, and I think that again ties to self-awareness that, you know, as you said, some people, you know, if you ask their opinion or their advice and they're having a bad day, they might deliver the gift to you in a really ugly package. And, you know, but I think it's that awareness to look at this gift either way and say, did I need this? Does this serve me? And I think that's, as you said, you can't give love until you love yourself. Like, I think that's the secret to, you know, what I find about the best networkers I know is they are absolutely unapologetically curious, but they're also very well versed in their inner world and their outer world. It's a lot easier to be giving and caring when you have that self-awareness. So I think, you know, it's one of the things I think a lot of people think, oh, it's a one and done, you know. I went to a workshop, I'm good. It's, you know, the best networkers I know spend a lot of time not just talking about building relationships with other people, but that inner relationship. So what are some other things, some practical things? So let's just say we have some people out there who are listening and maybe they're not completely self-aware, maybe they're earlier in the journey than you and I are. What are some steps they can take to build relationships while they're doing that inner work?
Sure. So two other areas of networking or relationship building that I want to talk about are preparation and follow-up. And I think that it's sad that so much of our effort and a lot of the material out there is focused on the actual relationship building and how to conduct those conversations and how to make it work, when I feel that I don't think it's an exaggeration to say 99% of success is in this area is from the prep and the follow-up specifically. And I say, again, this is something that I say all the time, and so few people actually do it. And that's why they're not succeeding. I can say that confidently. That is absolutely why they're not building good relationships. Again, it's like meeting someone on the street, you hit it off, you have an amazing conversation, you're forever friends, you're connected at the soul. If you don't reach out again and they don't reach out to you, it doesn't matter. You may as well have never met them.
Yep.
And you also may as well have never gone to the event or engaged in that one conversation. So when I meet somebody, I'm already thinking about the future. And I know that this conversation is only like an interview. It's a lead into the next one. And that's really all I care about. It's creating a connection so that we want to talk again.
And this is exactly, first of all, and for my listeners, Esther is going to be writing a book on this, so you will be able to learn more. Esther, in my humble opinion, as a passionate networker and fan of all things networking, her prep and her follow-up are epic. I will say that. So we're going to pick that apart and start with your preparation. So tell me about your I'm going to say process. I don't know if that's too formal, but
I
how
love
does
it.
Esther prepare to meet a new friend?
Process is a great way because it's practical. I want it to be practical. So it's hard to say generically because it depends on whether it's in person or online. But one example of something I do, as soon as I get a connection to somebody or I'm in touch with them, I go right to social media. For me, it's LinkedIn. For you, it might be something else based on your environment.
Yeah.
And I connect with them. A lot of people don't do that until you have the conversation.
Yeah.
Bad idea. Bad idea. Because right now, I have already brought them into my world by connecting. Yep. I have already, why would we not start building this foundation before we speak? So that's the first thing.
Love it.
And I will send them a message saying, so great to connect with you in this place or in that city or through this person's connection. That's twofold. It's completely selfish so that in 3 years, because I'm in it for the long run, when I go back to reconnect with them and to do my touch points, I know where I met them, because you may now only know 5 people, but if you continue to follow Jeff's advice and tips, you're going to know 1 million people in a year. So you want to be able to keep that, connection alive. And this is how you do it. Yeah. So I'll do that. And also for them, they are potentially an amazing networker, right? And somebody that also has a huge community, and you want them to be able to know where they got connected to you. So it's twofold. So that's the first thing I would do. I would also, if I have the ability, I would try to find out some information about them. And again, given, of course, people have time constraints, there's only so much research you could do, but it could be as easy as taking 2 minutes. Everybody has 2 minutes. Don't tell me you don't. Before your conversation, if you can, to learn something about them. What do they care about? What are they putting out to the world? Because even if there's nothing, that tells you something about them. Maybe the value you're going to give them is as simple as showing them how they could put out more information for the world so that people can find them for their amazing service that they have to offer. So just find whatever insight you can. And again, no information is information. So everything matters. And you might also find that you have a similar interest, background, education, passion. You might Google them and they're a famous basketball player. Maybe you played Little League in school. So these are all there's so much you could do before the conversation even happens to facilitate where you want to go and where they want to go. So that's kind of where I start. And I think you also are already, it's almost like dating, right? You're in the dating stage. You're getting to know about each other. The way that you respond to your email, do you add value in your initial engagement? There's always an opportunity to add value, and you always should be thinking about what you could get. So even just the way that you reply, do you greet them? Do you say thank you so much? Are you generous? Are you gracious? What are you giving them to let them know, to give them the idea that this is somebody that they want to connect with too? So that's all the things that I'd be thinking about before meeting someone.
I love it. And I will say for anybody who's listening to this that when Esther makes an introduction, and this is, again, not some false praise, because I don't praise networking people lightly. When Esther makes an introduction, the gratitude, this is, I think, one of the big aha moments for me, was the value that we bring to our network by being a connector. Every time Esther introduces somebody to me, and by the way, I was inbox 0 before I met Esther, and I haven't seen the bottom of my inbox in months. That is not a complaint. That is praise for Esther. But really, when people are connected and you connect the right people, that gratitude is currency that elevates everybody in the equation. So Esther has an amazing outreach game, and I think that's impressive. Now let's pivot to the follow-up piece, because I'm going to be honest, this is the piece where I went, I was at one point on this, I was going to network with everybody, and then I realized there's 8 billion plus people. It doesn't matter if I met every single one of them if I didn't somehow add value. And that's where I think, I'm building the follow-up routine. What do you do for follow-up? Because again, the people you've connected me with, every time we meet, there's a love fest where everybody's saying how amazing Esther is. So what's your follow-up? And again, I guess you do it very naturally because it's part of who you are.
Thank you. Appreciate that again, Jeff. So I'll first to speak to follow up. I just want to go to the actual engagement first and say that part of my other goal in the initial meeting is to get another meeting, but it's also, and to continue the relationship, but it's also to learn one or more, if you can get more, great things that the person is looking for now that you are able to fulfill. That's my goal. So, and there's, hopefully in your conversation, this will come out naturally. If you're looking for it, usually you'll find it. If it doesn't, what's the easiest way to find out what a person needs, which could be nothing. It could be they will say nothing. Ask. We had a great conversation. It was awesome. We talked about pizza. We both love pizza, and I'm so glad. And my pizza is now elevated forever. The one thing I didn't get to learn is, I know what toppings, all that. I didn't get to learn what I could do to help you. How could I add value to you today? It's not going to be that I could send you a client today because we just met and I don't know anyone off the top of my head. But there's many other ways I might be able to help you. What are you looking for? What do you need? Just ask. And most of the time, people will actually have a need that you might not even have uncovered if you didn't ask. Or sometimes they'll say nothing, or they'll say something, and you can ask a follow-up question. Well, from what I heard in our conversation, you love pizza, so I know a great shop. Could I send you a slice? Or how about a recommendation?
Yeah.
You always can give something. So hopefully it's something that, is related to what you're looking to get, but even based off of the conversation. And then now it goes one step further. Don't just say you're going to do it. I personally, this is a very personal thing, and I don't know for sure. I'm sure you don't need to be this way. I like to do things right away. I'm a doer. I think that a lot of people say things, do it, because that's the best way to build trust, credibility, and to make sure you actually keep your word. And that's like crucial in building relationships. So I like to leave time after calls, and sometimes I don't leave enough time, and I'll tell the person, set expectations, tell them I'm going to be away for the next 2 weeks. So it's so sorry, it's going to take me 2 weeks to make this. Is that okay? Does it work for you? Of course, they'll say yes. I'm grateful for this connection. Now, here's the catch. You could say 6 months. Just do it in 6 months. Do it in 6 months, or else you were better off not having the conversation. I can't say it strongly enough. And it sounds silly, but people don't do that. And the way you do it in 6 months, I use a tasks in my CRM, customer relationship manager. If you don't have one, there's many other free apps and ways you can keep track. Make yourself a note, because you're human and you can't remember off the top of your head, no matter how many connections you have, because it's 6 months away.
So especially when you have a bunch of connections.
I was going to say that, and then I was like, listen, even I want everyone to know that this is relevant for everybody at any stage of the relationship building. Yeah. So even if you have two connections, you're human, and you need to create a follow-up for yourself. And that is the respectful thing to do, because you made a promise to somebody and you need to fulfill it. So even if you leave your job, it is your responsibility to get their information off of LinkedIn or somewhere else and fulfill the promise that you promised them. So that's the number one that I would say to follow up.
Love it. Keep your promises.
Keep your promise. Yeah.
And one of the things I do, and I think, Esther, you probably do it naturally too, when I know somebody is dealing with something, I'll share a resource. Like, it costs me nothing, takes me 5 seconds of my time, but I'll send them something and say, oh, here's a book I like, here's a podcast. I share a lot of knowledge, not because I'm some strange person who's got nothing better to do, but when I make somebody's life easier, and sometimes it's sharing a widely available public TED Talk, but letting people know that you're thinking of them. And the other thing I do a lot is I love making introductions. And just for the audience listening, Esther has pushed my follow-up game beyond my personal capabilities. I'm an introvert and I like small, but the reality is I've created a LinkedIn group specifically to connect Esther with the wonderful, amazing, she's female, she's an entrepreneur. So I've created a group just to connect Esther with other female entrepreneurs in my circle. One of my favorite aha moments is that groups on LinkedIn cost me nothing, but they can make a lot of simplicity, because instead of trying to remember, hey, Esther, you need to meet these 50 people. And, oh, by the way, I have OCD, so I will introduce somebody to 50 people at once. I've also realized that's kind of a mean thing to do. So with the group, I can one at a time say, okay, you two need to meet. Once you've connected, then I can introduce you to the next one. That's where I was about a year ago with networking. I got so excited. I'd introduce somebody to 100 people in a day, and then there's no follow-up, and it's like, oops, I broke them. So that's I think huge. The other thing I want to point out is the CRM. I used to, in my younger days, I'd work a job, I'd populate a CRM, and then when I'd leave, oh crap, the CRM is left behind. There's some amazing low cost or free CRMs. I tell aspiring networkers, as you said, whether you know 2 people or 200, have a personal CRM where you can keep notes and say, here's how I know this person. I love thebrain.com, which is my go-to tool, but find the one that works for you.
It's really good advice, and it doesn't have to cost a lot. And I just want to point out too, Jeff, you mentioned you being an introvert. I'm an extroverted introvert, and I think it's a myth that introverts can't network. I believe that introverts are some of the best networkers around because often they know how to listen, they're thoughtful, they ask good questions, which is a big part of relationship building and something that I'm working on because I don't think I always ask the best questions. Part of getting the best answer is asking the right question. So I just want to put out there on record that introverts, it is a myth that you need to be a certain this or that, just like it's a myth that to be a good leader, you need to be a certain personality. You do not. In fact, it could even be an advantage. So it's just knowing how to use it and what types of relationship building to do that feed who you are. So it's, again, really connected to that self-awareness and and leveraging your strengths.
Well, and I think that's I know a lot of introverts who say I'm an introvert, therefore I can't network. And I'm an introvert and I network. It's not I can't
network well. So case in point. And another point I would just say about the follow-up is don't assume things about people. I encounter this a lot, and it's actually pretty mind-blowing. A lot of times people assume that you are looking for a specific thing in a conversation, or that your need now is a certain thing. Always ask, don't assume. Some people love, 20 introductions after a call, and some people don't want any. And they both appreciate that being fulfilled. And to them, it's as if you gave on the same level. So we often give the way that we want to be given, that we want to give. We give the way we want to receive instead of understanding about the other person and how they want to receive and then adapting our way of giving accordingly. It's a really important thing to keep in mind. Always ask and don't assume. Ask, I can make you 15 introductions. Is that what you want? Is that what you're looking for? Is that going to be helpful for you now? Because the answer is not always yes. And that matters. It shows that you care. It's also respecting about what's important to them, not just what you have that you want to give. So keeping that in mind is huge. And I counted it all the time. I've had people complain about getting things that to me would have been a great gift. So you have to keep in mind the other person, not yourself so much.
And full disclosure, networking with Esther is a little like drinking from a fire hose. She's amazing. So we only have a couple minutes left. I want to ask you 2 questions. Number one, how can people make your life easier when they're attempting to connect with you? Because that's one of my things is, we need to up level the networking community so that people aren't bringing us things that they think are a gift that are really annoying. But how can people best connect with you and best serve you?
I really appreciate that, Jeff. So I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's one of my favorite platforms to connect with people. So definitely love always meeting new people and helping however I can. So always open to new connections there. You could always find me at our website, which is rcsprofessional.com. And I love that you asked that question. I personally love when people come to one of my networking communities before we meet, because again, it gives me time to get to know them in a way that isn't one-to-one. And I actually find value in that long-term. So it's a lot of people don't ask or don't want to, because again, they want to connect in the way that's best for them, which is fine. But if they did really want to do it in a way that's best for me, that's what I love. I love having more people on my networking groups. I have an ability to meet a lot of people and still be able to connect on an individual level and help them, but it saves me some time. So I think that it's a great question, and it shows your mindset in helping others the way that they want to be helped. So I appreciate that.
And I think that's a lot of people, I've had this conversation with many, many, many people who are networking that, oh, you got to do one-on-one. Why? It's a waste of my time and yours. So I love that you host communities and have these events. So we will include links to that. Now, my final question is probably the fun one. Um, who or what resources have inspired and shaped you the most in your networking journey? Because I think that's, people can learn from you, but they also can learn from who you've learned from. So who are your big inspirations in your networking style?
Oh, that's a good question. I personally relate to I relate to people who are practical and people who I could see myself in. So not necessarily so far removed from where I am or where I want to be. I learned a lot about relationship building. So I'm a social worker, as I mentioned, and I had an incredible sort of background, but I had an incredible internship experience with a not-for-profit called Pathways to Leadership. And we worked in schools doing one-to-one mentorship with renewal schools, which are schools that have been labeled by the government in New York City as problematic. And so I was working with middle schoolers. Most of them were living in homeless shelters or in the correctional system or both. And I learned more than I've ever learned in that 1 year. I had amazing supervision. And one of my mentors I'm still in touch with from that organization. And I learned so much because I had to engage students who were struggling with so much. And it was such a challenge, but it taught me how to connect with people at their level and achieve a goal. So I don't know if that's so helpful for your audience, but that's where I got a
No.
lot of my inspiration and help. And I think working with youth in general, if you have an opportunity to do it from a volunteer standpoint, is really powerful. You learn a lot because they give it to you as it is. There's no sugarcoating, and you learn a lot about yourself. And so they gave me a lot more than I hope that I gave them. But that was a big part of my inspiration. And I think I revert back to it all the time in learning relationship building. And that was actually the reason I went to social work school, is I wanted to improve my relationships with people and build better connections. So hopefully I accomplished that, but
I
that's a
think
lot of my why. So
that's your essence. And, I'm just going to share this. When, I was talking about mentorship and helping my boys. I have two boys. I talk a lot about helping them. And one day I realized that I was learning more from them than they were from me. And my ego got in the way, and I was like, oh, I got to up my dad game. And then I realized the only way to improve my dad game is to learn those lessons. And that's the beautiful thing. A teenage kid, they haven't learned, white lies and social nuances. They just call it like it is. And um, it's not ever wrapped nicely when they give you that feedback. It's usually quite stark. But when you learn that lesson, your relationship is better because of it. So I do that is a valuable. Now, again, some people say, well, I'm not going to go get a social work degree just to get this. But I think it's very practical to, a lot of people don't mentor, they don't give back. And in that, you're missing out on so much. I'm addicted to mentorship, and maybe I need an intervention, but my life is always richer for it. And I think honestly, you're learning that it's not about the transaction, about the relation, it's about the relationship. And when you build those, I love that you network 3 years out. Most people are like, do you have a client for me today? Okay, I got no use for you.
exactly. Biggest mistake. I would also say two books that I love that are more relationship focused. Jeff Hayden is a big thought leader in the marketing space, but in my opinion, very, very thoughtful in the relationship building space as well. His book, They Ask You Answer, changed my life from a marketing standpoint. I actually got the opportunity to meet him at a conference. He was lovely in person, which I assumed through his writing. Super approachable, just really the nicest guy. And response to his LinkedIn. I mean, this guy's keynoting all over. So really, really recommend. Another book, which is also really helpful for self-awareness, is Taking Flight by Merrick Rosenberg. We use that internally in our organization, but it's an amazing tool for individuals as well. It's based on the DISC assessment, so it's helping you get to know your style. What I love about the way that Merrick breaks it down is it teaches you not just about yourself, which many of the self-tests do, it teaches you how to use yourself in relation to others. And isn't that what it's really all about? So I think that's a piece that's super important that he gives, also available on Amazon. And then, of course, I do have a book on Amazon as well. So I have to mention that. It's on mental health and entrepreneurship. So
oh, very cool. We'll provide a link to that in the notes.
Perfect. Thank you.
And for anybody listening, Esther and I have had many conversations about Bob Burg as well. I think we want to throw that one in there because
absolutely,
you can't be a go-giver unless you have that self-awareness. And one thing I'll just say, when I'm networking, people are confused about what they want. That makes it really hard for me to serve. So one of the things I would say is have that self-awareness. When you're coming to someone like Esther and you're looking for something in a relationship, have a plan for what you'd like to get out of that relationship. And I'm going to say this really bluntly, have a plan for what you're going to put into that relationship. And by the way, the deposit always has to come before the withdrawal. Is that fair?
I love that. I love that. And for the best books on relationship building or networking, look for books on service leadership, Setting the Table by Danny Meyer. I also got to meet him, which was incredible. Huge fan. Yeah, I recommend. And all these meetings were through relationship building, by the way. But definitely service leadership, anything service is where you're going to make the best, most fulfilling relationships, not just the most productive.
I love it. Well, Esther, I really want to thank you. You and I could talk about networking and relationships all day, but I want to respect your time. So thank you for hanging out with me.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeff.